I call Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
I move the question be now put.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is the first opportunity that I've had to make a contribution to this committee stage of the Taxation Annual Reports for 2015-16 Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill, and in particular on Part 1, which deals with child support. Mr. Chairman, this is a very important part of the bill because it goes to real life for real Kiwis, and it's not always what people expect it will be. And the law, as they say, is an ass. The law is never able to fit itself to each individual's personal particulars, and so today we are here in the House to try to tweak and mould and update this very complex piece of the legislation about child support to ensure that it is fit for purpose and meets the needs of New Zealand families, which come in all shapes and sizes. I propose to structure my remarks for the House, sir, as follows. A couple of general comments about the tax context of this bill as set out more broadly with the confirmation of annual rates, very passing comment there. Recap on the objectives of child support policy, dive briefly into some of the core implementation issues, and then there are some specific clauses in Part 1 which I wish to draw the attention of the House to and seek the Minister's clarification. Her officials are busily ready to brief her, and we will be looking for some comment from the Minister. Firstly, just to reprise briefly the context here, this is the annual rates tax bill for people out there in New Zealand. This is the annual instrument which is brought to the House to confirm the tax rate. This one, of course, comes after what the government called the tax switch, and it was essentially a switch of the burden from the top to the middle. So middle income New Zealand has been squeezed as 40% of the tax remission in the government's first term went to the top 10% of earners. And that's laid the foundation for a period of relative hardship for middle New Zealand families, some of which, of course, are families not in their original nuclear structure, where people are having to make do even though they've separated, or they are divorced, or they're in blended families, or they're having to take care of child support. But it's against that background of the widening gap between rich and poor, which this government's overseen because of those annual rates reconfirmation. It is a long-standing objective of child support policy that children come first. The law is written around the primacy of the interests of the child and tries to get an equitable formula for contribution to the upkeep of the children from both parents, whether one is the primary custodial parent and another one is not principally living with the child, or whether they're both sharing parenting. The formula has to be flexible enough to cope with a wide range of situations, and that is never easy when you're writing legislation to take account of the multiplicity of people's personal situations. It's well known, I think, in this House, and it's part of the context of Part 1 of this bill, that there have been major issues with child support over the years. When the current government took office, the debt mountain of unpaid child support debt and penalties was, from memory, in the order of something like $500 or $600 million, and it's now around $2 billion. $3 billion. Well, isn't that a calamitous rise in debt? Because that is debt, part of which is payments that should have gone to the children in their new family situations. Part of it is, of course, the penalty regime. A quick word on child support penalties. It's been well known that they have been too onerous, and that has unfortunately locked a lot of non-custodial parents, usually dads, out of a situation where they're having ongoing contact because they are so far behind in their debt relative to their earning ability that they are sometimes forced offshore or essentially into hiding, and that is bad for the children. And it's bad for them, and it's an ongoing human tragedy which is going to cost New Zealand for generations to come. So it's really essential when we look at this bill in Part 1 that we have as a lens on it, are we doing enough to ensure that all parents, whether they are the primary custodial parent or the more remote parent, are able to contribute, and when they do get behind, that they can catch up again without penalties that are so onerous that it locks them out of the system, because just imagine the guilt and the grief that that leads to. Mr. Chairman, I wish at this point
Honourable
to turn
David Cunliffe.
Thank you, sir. I wish to turn, if I could, to several of the clauses which are embedded in Part 1, which I think would be very helpful to get some clarification from the Minister on. Sir, firstly, in sections 4, 5, 6, 8, the bill is updating the definitional language in this part of the Income Tax Act to redefine the benefit types in terms of the job seeker support in subclause 1A. It is updating language around transitional applications, etc. in clause 5. It is reaffirming in clause 7 that any parent or carer of a qualifying child can apply to the Commissioner for a formula assessment. And the restating of that in 7.1, which replaces the old 8.1, sir, I think is very, very important, because circumstances change, and oftentimes separating parents will be able to enter into an agreement, not necessarily foreseeing all future changes. And of course the law provides the ability for either parent to return to the court, return to the law, and to request a formula assessment. The nature of that assessment therefore becomes as important as the process by which it's conducted, and so the bill goes on in new clause 13A stating that the Commissioner must refuse to make a formula assessment in respect of a qualifying child old enough to demand in their own right an assessment if subsection 2 or 4 above applies. That means if they're already covered, I think, by a receiving carer. But the Minister might wish to comment on the application of subsections 2 and 4, because it is a very confusing reverse link, and we would like clarification of how that impacts and the precise grounds in summary for which the Commissioner must refuse an application from a qualifying child, because the qualifying child definition in itself is a complex one. It goes on in subsection 3 to say that subsection 2 does not apply if the applicant is a parent and the child has a parent with whom the applicant is not living in a marriage, civil union or de facto relationship, or a non-parent carer whom the applicant is not living with in a marriage, civil union, de facto relationship. So if the application is made by a parent and the child has a parent or a non-parent caregiver who is not living with them, then the subsection applies. But it's a complex piece of law because you've got several tiebacks, if you like, to earlier sections, and I would really appreciate if the Minister would be able to take a call and just to clarify in summary what are the criteria for that very strong language in that subsection 13A1. The Commissioner must refuse to make an assessment, because prima facie it seems to lean against the principle that either parent or a qualifying child can request. So it's rather important to be clear about when and why the Commissioner must refuse, because it's a must. Section 10 of the bill amends the original section 25 and notes when liability to pay child support ceases. That is important, again, because it is impossible to foresee every particular circumstance, but we need to have general rules. It's possible under new section 27 for the receiving carer to elect to end a formula assessment. The law is, I guess, attempting to provide for a basis where a child support agreement can be updated by either party, both to bring in a formula assessment or, if circumstances change, to end it. So, for example, a custodial parent, often mother, may re-partner, may enter into a relationship where there is sufficient material support for all of the children of that blended family and for whom the previous formula assessment either no longer applies because it does not fairly reflect the balance of income of the two originally separated parents, or isn't needed at all because, frankly, the new blended family is materially well enough resourced that the non-custodial parent's contribution becomes unnecessary. Sir, these are difficult and complex matters, and it is well known that there have been multiple iterations of tax. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Ian McIndoe. No, Tim McIndoe.